Hi everyone, it's Alana, and today we're going to talk about what it means to build a defensible research dissertation proposal. Several reasons behind this discussion, the most important being that to the extent that you know the overarching issues behind each of the three major sections to a proposal, the more likely you're going to know where things go. They're going to make some kind of logical sense, and ultimately you'll have a lighter review process. That does not say that the review process is ever completely light, just like this man trying to pull out one of the pegs in this design. The review process always looks for the holes, but hopefully if we understand the whole thing, it becomes easier. My experience of working with doctoral students is that you may be able to identify with this. Does it feel to you like you have all these parts and pieces that they've given you in classes, but that it's really difficult to know and understand how to put those parts and pieces together in a strong, defensible proposal? That's what our goal is today. So let's start with the first three components. A proposal always has, whether it's for a dissertation or a project, and this would be true for those of you who are doing a number of papers, the same three components exist, although they're different in the amount of depth you give each one, depending on the final format. So we're going to call the first one Chapter 1, looking at it as though it's a dissertation. However, for those of you writing papers or studies, this is a section of the first part of what you write. Nevertheless, same things hold true. First off, it's difficult to write it because you don't know all that it needs to go into it until you've written the whole thing. So plan on reworking the first part of what you write at the end. That'll take some of the pressure off getting it right. This part sets the foundation of the whole. So the couple of things you absolutely need to do for your readers: you need to define the context and the goals of your study, and you need to introduce your research questions. By context, I mean not only the broader issue under study, but also the local context in which your research will take place. Only the basics here. This is not where you put all that you know about any of these things. The purpose of this first component, calling it Chapter 1, is that it must engage the reader and convince them that your ideas in design are solid. If you give them too much, it gets boring, it gets convoluted, you don't quite understand where the author is going. So trim it down to where it gives exactly these things, especially, as I have in bold print, defining the context and the goals and introducing the research questions. The second component is the review of the literature. This is where you prove that you know your topic, and it's where you define for your reader how you, notice I'm putting it, how you define your theoretical and conceptual ideas, what you see as the panorama of this topic, and the subtopics that are so interesting that they bear further study. You take us through what you have experienced as the holes in the literature, and then your ideas about the methodology through which you will study those holes. This is a middle piece, and it builds from the first that sets us up for the project, but it's also a foundational piece that leads us to the methodology. All the way through that, I use the word you. And as Rudistam and Newton remind us on page 64, a principal failing of novice researchers at every stage of the project, but especially in the review of the literature, is giving away their own power and authority. This is not about what others say, This is about what you think about what others say. I hope that helps. Then that leads us on to the methodology, which several points here. Exact vocabulary counts. Your work will be read by researchers, and to researchers, precise wording means a lot. So make sure that this is very tight. To do that, I always recommend that you find some professional researchers and that you like the way they talk and write about their subject, and you use their language style as a model. Because until you develop one of your own, which is many years down the road, the best you can do is copy the ones you really like and then put your ideas into the way they say things. Be sure to cite and reference rather than telling us why you're doing something. I'm speaking specifically here to a habit that a lot of doctoral students get into of saying, Creswell, 2001, tells us that to do this, this, and this is the way to go forward. And so since you agree with Creswell, that's what you're doing. Rather, taking on your own power, you say this study does this, this, and this, and then you cite Creswell. Does the same thing, but one is vocabulary and language that holds on to you as the person moving forward. That takes you immediately into a place that is more defensible, because it's you doing the work rather than you stumbling around letting others tell you how to do the work. The two things we look for in methodology is whether or not it's logical and whether or not it's doable. So I'm going to go into those a little bit more carefully. I like to see students put together a diagram of what you're going to do. The reason is that once you figured it out in diagram form, much easier to write. So let me show you some student diagrams. The point of these is to delineate the logic and the process. And even though they are not required in any dissertation format, they're also not excluded from any dissertation format. So if you like to write things out in pictures and then talk about them, feel free. This is something that is logical, and many of your readers will also be visual thinkers, and they'll get it faster when they see it this way. So this student had a particular problem question, identified that she worked out of two epistemological stances, pragmatism and empiricism, to which she applied, because of her question and those stances of how she would know things, drew her to the methodology of participatory action research, practitioner research. Then, because that's a very practical methodology, she started by benchmarking what was going on currently through interviews and teacher recommendations, using that to implement some program changes and periodically measure through going back to those same benchmarks how they were doing. Towards the end, then, she reflected and discussed what had gone on in order to propel her into a new cycle. Participatory action research being a cyclic process, she would go through this over and over again. So that's her logical research framework. And you can see how easily then she can identify each one of those, give it a couple of paragraphs, and she's well on her way to writing her methods chapter. This is another one, also from a student. She has her topic, which is the effectiveness of problem-based learning across different curricula. She asked a specific question: will the implementation enhance critical thinking? Her epistemology was constructivism, and she decided to use participatory action research and design-based research. So then that takes her into a cycle. The cycle includes benchmarking, doing some research and notice that she has a control group of people who aren't going through the problem-based learning, so that she can see the differences between one student group and another. And then she did an assessment or evaluation of the process, which takes her back in a cycle going around through benchmarking again. So that's how she drew out her design. Also, a component of having it drawn out in a design is that your methodology people can more easily pinpoint what parts may not be as weak, maybe a little weaker or not as doable. So it's perhaps a bit easier for all of us to discuss. Now, some of you may have more complex designs. This one is for the Futures of Education project that I run, and it's a multi-year international project. It's got lots of components, but even that can be broken down into, we have these basic epistemological ideas. We're participatory, we're pragmatic, and we're emancipatory, looking for transformative outcomes. We go through a participatory action research cycle, which produces data along the way, right here, between the act and measurement components. Those data we take into, and here are the kinds of data, we take into this kind of methodology, disseminating the results, reflecting upon it, and leading us back into another cycle. So even the most complex can be drawn out this way. Now, the second question that we ask ourselves during a defense is whether or not your research design is doable. One of my professors reminded us that this is not your book. So if you think a big project really needs to be done, you're passionate about your subject, great, but keep your research design small enough that you don't become overwhelmed. We need to know what you're going to measure and how big your population is. Those two things determine a lot about which methods or tools you use in your research. Quantitative is difficult because your instruments may or may not measure what you want them to, and you may or may not get a significant response level from the people. So quantitative, great for big populations where you want a small amount of data. Qualitative, good for smaller populations where you want to go deep into the questions that you're asking. Mixed methods may be a way to hedge your bet. Hate to do a whole lot of research and come up with results that are less than stellar. However, less than stellar results will not keep you from graduating. A research design that doesn't do what it says it's going to do is we try to catch at the proposal stage. So no matter what your outcomes are, you're still heading through on a graduation path. Action research, if you're asking a question that looks to the future, what can we do about this? What would happen if? Then you're doing action research or evaluation. Now, what makes it defensible? What makes it so strong that you can pull out as many pieces as have been pulled out here during the critique and it's still standing? Do you have all the materials in your final that we look for? Does it make sense as a whole? Is it provocative, concise, not boring? And does the design stand up under critique? So you all go to different universities and they have different scales of what materials those professors look for. So go back to your university for that. Look for dissertations of people who've graduated. Look also to the massive amounts of dissertations out there. If you aren't given much guidance, choose what you want to have in your proposal. If you're given a lot of guidance, like you have a rubric to work with, go with the rubric exactly. But still, even though you're using a rubric, it still might not make sense. So come back here, remind yourself of the reason for the different parts. Don't lose the forest for the trees, is kind of the example there. Read through it, have others read through it, and tell you when they got bored. Because academic writing, it's really easy to be boring, and there's no reason for it. You can trim out to the bare essentials and get the job done. Remember, it is better to build a little solid structure than to build a complex big thing that falls down during defense. Your defense is going to require some reworking from you. It always does. But the less reworking, the happier you will be. I hope this clears up some confusion. If you need more resources, my website, reinventinglife.org, under the Doctoral Participatory blog, has some tools. And Ruta Stammen Newton, Surviving Your Dissertation, a fantastic book. I hope this is helpful.